All right, let's jump right into this. On May 25th, 2025, a massive container ship called the MSC Elsa 3 completely capsized and sank, taking over 640 containers straight down to the bottom of the ocean. Now, when a vessel of this sheer size goes down, our first instinct is usually to blame extreme weather, right? Like some unavoidable act of nature. But as we're going to unpack in this explainer, the sinking of the Elsa 3 was absolutely none of those things. It was a highly preventable catastrophe. We're talking about a textbook cascading failure across mechanics, structure, and management.
To really understand what happened, we need to understand exactly where it happened. The Elsa 3 was actually on a completely routine coastal voyage from Vietnam to Kochi. But this everyday trip ended in total disaster just 14.6 nautical miles off the Kerala coast in the Arabian Sea. Think about that for a second. It wasn't lost out in the middle of a remote, raging ocean. It sank right in the middle of a busy, heavily navigated coastal corridor.
And that proximity to the coast is exactly why this matters so much right now. Because this isn't just a story about a sunken ship, it's an active environmental crisis. Following the sinking, 22 tons of toxic pre-production plastic nurdles washed ashore on the Kanyakumari coast. It's an absolute nightmare for marine wildlife and local ecosystems. Seeing this immediate, devastating aftermath really forces us to ask the big question driving today's explainer. How does a massive, multi-million-dollar container ship just tip over and sink in calm waters?
To figure that out, we're going to look at the preliminary Casualty Investigation Report conducted by India's Directorate General of Shipping, the DGS, which aligns with the IMO's Casualty Investigation Code. They used a sort of Swiss cheese model for their autopsy, uncovering 4 distinct layers of failure. 1. Ballast system failure. 2. Latent structural defects. 3. Safety and regulatory lapses. And 4. Human error and training. And then we'll wrap up by looking at number 5, the environmental aftermath.
Okay, let's start with the first layer. Section 1, Ballast System Failure, the catalyst.
The immediate technical cause of the disaster was a critical malfunction in the vessel's ballast water handling and integrated healing systems. Basically, the automated mechanism designed to keep the ship upright was completely out of commission. And think about the timeline here. For a staggering 36 hours before the ship developed a severe list, the ballast management system was literally flashing abnormal pressure readings. These were blaring warning signs, and they were completely ignored by management. Because the automated system failed, progressive flooding worsened, which eventually inundated the engine room and triggered a total electrical blackout. The crew was suddenly stripped of any power to run emergency pumps. Which leads us directly to this terrifying number, 26 degrees. Without power, the vessel developed an uncontrollable 26-degree starboard list. I mean, at that severe of an angle, massive shipping containers literally begin tearing loose from their lashings and plummeting into the sea. Once a ship of this immense size hits a 26-degree list with a total power blackout, any chance of a manual correction by the crew becomes physically and mathematically impossible. Game over, essentially. But here's the thing. A broken pump alone usually doesn't sink a ship like this. Let's look at the second pillar. Section 2. Latent structural defects, a compromised hull. We're talking about a 28-year-old vessel here, and its watertight integrity was severely compromised before it even untied its mooring lines. Investigators found that progressive flooding was stemming from multiple hidden sources. There was a leaking manhole cover on double-bottom tank number 5, there was a cracked weld seam in a port wing ballast tank, and honestly, this is the most shocking part. They found unrepaired structural damage from a 2016 collision off the coast of Yemen. The hull was literally relying on temporary substandard band-aids that just catastrophically failed under operational stress. And all of those latent defects allowed progressive flooding to discharge directly into cargo hold number 4. Now, if you imagine massive amounts of water sloshing around freely inside a giant cargo hold, it creates something in maritime physics called a free surface effect. This completely destroys the ship's center of gravity and its ability to stay upright. The ship was literally filling with water from the inside out, and the weakened structure just couldn't contain it. Which naturally brings us to the third, and perhaps most infuriating layer. Section 3, Safety and Regulatory Lapses, the systemic rot. So you're probably wondering, how on earth was a 28-year-old ship with leaking tanks and broken ballast systems legally allowed to sail? Well, there was a stark, dangerous contrast between paper compliance and operational reality. Officially, the Classification Society, Bureau Veritas, had recently certified the ship as seaworthy until 2028.
and its safety management system looked super robust on paper. But in reality, the DGS report suggested that document review was prioritized over rigorous physical inspections. They completely failed to detect the deteriorating hull and the repetitive mechanical defects the crew was battling every single day. In fact, the DGS report delivered a really heavy indictment of this exact scenario. They explicitly noted a troubling gap between paper certification and operational safety. Basically, having the right stamps on your paperwork means absolutely nothing if the physical reality of the vessel is literally crumbling underneath you. It's nothing but a dangerous illusion of safety. And I think this number really drives that grim reality home. 8 months. The crew on board the Elsa 3 actually knew the automated systems were failing. They had explicitly requested essential spare parts and flagged them to shoreside management as critical. But management, who were operating out of an office in Cyprus, completely ignored these requests. They left those critical orders unfulfilled for an agonizing 8 months prior to the fatal voyage. Just incredibly negligent. All right, let's look at the fourth and final pillar. Section 4, human error and training. The final nail. When the mechanics failed, the hull breached, and management offered zero support, the burden fell entirely on the crew to save the ship. So let's walk through this final domino effect. Step 1. Water inundates the engine room, causing that total electrical blackout we talked about. Step 2. Because of the blackout, the automated healing tanks fail completely. Step 3. This is where human readiness comes into play. The multinational crew actually possessed the theoretical knowledge of what to do, but they completely lacked practical, real-world training in executing emergency manual ballast overrides during a blackout scenario. When the lights went out, they simply couldn't manually pump the water to save the ship. And making matters so much worse, crisis coordination was severely handicapped because the chief officer had joined the vessel just 1 week before the incident. 1 week. That allowed for practically zero handover time and a completely insufficient familiarization period with the ship's highly degraded, quirky systems. In a life-or-death crisis, you need to know your ship blindfolded, and this guy barely had time to unpack his bags.
So the ship goes down. But sadly, the story doesn't end there. Section 5, the environmental aftermath, a toxic legacy.
We really have to zoom back out to look at the broader implications here, because this sinking has left lasting scars on the coastal ecosystems of southern India. Right now, Greenpeace workers are meticulously sifting through beach sand just trying to mitigate the damage. You see, the vessel was carrying highly volatile cargo and persistent marine fuels that are now directly threatening benthic ecosystems. Those are the vital organisms living right at the bottom of the ocean. And the overwhelming cleanup effort is mostly focused on that massive release of plastic nurdles we discussed earlier. These things act like toxic sponges in the water, literally poisoning the marine food chain from the bottom up. It all reveals a really tragic trade-off. On one side of the ledger, you have corporate cost-cutting, an aging 28-year-old feeder ship operated under a Liberian flag of convenience by the shipping giant MSC, specifically to minimize regulatory oversight. On the other side, you have the actual toll, 22 tons of toxic nurdles, a massive wreck sitting 51 meters deep, and untold damage to the benthic ecosystem. Local coastal communities are the ones being forced to bear the heavy, tangible environmental cost of these global corporate tactics. Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling reality, doesn't it? The MSC Elsa 3 wasn't some freak anomaly. It was a symptom of a massive systemic issue. With thousands of aging, under-maintained ships currently operating under lax flags of convenience across our global oceans right this second, we really have to ask ourselves, is the next disaster already cascading? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep looking into the safety and accountability of the global maritime shipping industry. There is a lot more beneath the surface.